All right, let's get into Habakkuk 3. This is the last chapter of the book. We are coming to the close here, and my voice is coming to a close this week. I'm glad we're only covering these 3 chapters of Habakkuk because I am running out of steam. But thank you guys for bearing with my bronchitis. We're almost there. We're going to have this all figured out next week. Hopefully I'll be all better then. All right, so Habakkuk 3. Now, from chapters 1 and 2, God has reassured Habakkuk of his promised deliverance of Israel, and he's reoriented Habakkuk to the biblical narrative. So if you haven't watched chapters 1 and 2, please go back and watch those because these really all go together as one continuous message, it really seems. So definitely look at those because we are continuing from where we were in chapter 2. Now, Habakkuk responds in chapter 3 with this trembling submission and agreement, this acknowledgement that, Lord, you really know what you're doing. And he comes into agreement with it. He advocates for it, just like Isaiah does in chapter 26 that we'll reference actually here in a moment. Essentially, here in verse 2, Habakkuk says, God, I have heard of your biblical narrative. I have been reoriented. God, would you do it in my day? Fulfill your biblical narrative, the way that you are unfolding it right here in my generation. Let me see it. Let me be part of it. So where Habakkuk had previously complained that God was not adequately judging Israel's enemies, well, now Habakkuk says, in your wrath, remember mercy. Habakkuk's attitude has shifted where he's advocating for the Lord's biblical narrative, and he's, rather than just this complaint that, God, you're not wrathful enough. No, now instead he says, God, in your wrath, remember mercy. And so here's what Habakkuk saw. Remember when we said there's an oracle in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 1. He says, the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. And here it is. This is what Habakkuk saw. This is so cool. Now, Habakkuk is going to document his rendition of Israel's final deliverance, of the Messiah's day of vengeance. Now, commentators often note the similarities with phrases that are found back in the Song of Moses, or in earlier Psalms, or in Isaiah 63 through 66. There's a lot of parallels with previous judgments and previous days of deliverance that all seem to be combined to describe this final deliverance, this final day of vengeance and his final wrath upon the nations. It's almost like it's the plagues of Exodus, the flood of Noah, the destruction of the Gideon's army, liberation, all combined together into one massive deliverance at the end of the age. And it's quite terrifying. I mean, when you come to see the scope and the combination of all these things, you really are kind of like, Lord, in your wrath, remember mercy. Habakkuk is describing a vision that's based on prophetic passages. And so he may be drawing from earlier references. That's okay. But he definitely says, I saw things. And so this is definitely a vision. And Habakkuk is using historical examples to describe how God will again deliver Israel in like manner, in a similar way. And in a lot of ways, the way that the Lord delivers Israel throughout history is a foreshadowing of that final way. And so they're not in competition. They're actually complementary to each other. And other prophets would describe the Lord's day of deliverance the same way. Micah chapter 7, verse 15, Micah says, as in the days when you came out of the land of Egypt, I will again show them marvelous things, referring to the end of the age. And Isaiah said the same thing. And the Lord of hosts will wield against them a whip as when he struck Midian at the rock of Oreb, and his staff will be over the sea of the nations, and he will lift it as he did in Egypt at the end of the age. Saying, as in the time of Egypt, this is going to happen again. There's going to be very similar circumstances, but on a much different type of scale and even type of severity, I would say. But let's go ahead. We get into verse 3 now. He sees God coming from Teman. Now, Teman is another name for Bozrah, the city of Bozrah. It's the capital city in Edom. Now, if you've been following along, we actually know quite a bit about Bozrah. We would expect by this point to see God coming from Bozrah. And the Holy One from Mount Paran. Now that Mount Paran, commentators go back and forth about what does that mean. That area, there's kind of a wilderness of Paran. It's really around where often is described as near where the Sinai assembly happened. It's really from Mount Sinai. It's kind of believed to be this representative prophetic term for the Sinai area. So they see God coming from where he had instituted his covenant in a major way at Sinai, up through Bozrah, coming to Jerusalem to deliver Israel and destroy her enemies. Now, this is very in line with what Isaiah prophesied in, 63. He says in 63 verse 1, "Who is this who's coming from Edom, the one in crimson garments coming from Bozrah?" And of course, the Lord says, "It is I, speaking in righteousness and mighty to save." It is their Messiah coming from Teman and from Mount Paran. He says, his splendor, coming back to Habakkuk 3 verse 3, his splendor covers the heavens, meaning covers the sky, and the earth is full of his righteousness. Again, that's Isaiah 24. From the ends of the earth, we hear songs of praise, of glory to the righteous one. In Isaiah 40, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together. And his glory fills the sky in such a way that all flesh see it together. This is what Habakkuk is starting to see here. It's what's unraveling in front of him. His brightness was like the light. Rays flashed from his hand. And even then, his power was veiled. Even then, he's restraining the full measure of his wrath. Even then, his wrath is perfectly calibrated. Oh, it's so cool. And again, cross-references there. So he sees the Lord coming like a light, and before him goes pestilence, and a plague follows at his feet. And he stood and he measured the earth. He looked at the nations, and he shook the nations. And the eternal mountains were scattered. The everlasting hills sank low. His were the everlasting ways. Oh my goodness. And a cool parallel here, Habakkuk is seeing God appearing to deliver Israel in this terrifying glory, though it's still restrained glory, but it's so parallel to Isaiah 10. Let me just give you this little section of Isaiah 10. "Therefore, the God of hosts will send a wasting sickness, a plague." Again, various plagues and pestilences are associated with the day of God's vengeance and described in other parts of biblical prophecy, and more that we'll look at in even weeks to come. But here Isaiah gives us one. "The Lord, the God of hosts, will send a wasting sickness among the Antichrist stout warriors. And under his glory, a burning will be kindled, like a burning fire. The light of Israel will become a fire, and his Holy One a flame, the shining light with these either flashes of flames or flashes of light coming from his hands, and it will burn and devour his thorns and briars in one day," the Antichrist army. The glory of his forest, this grand army, and all this fruitful land, the Lord will destroy, both soul and body, and it will be as when a sick man wastes away. Again, very, very parallel to what Habakkuk is seeing here. That was Isaiah chapter 10. Back to Habakkuk chapter 3 now. Verse 7, "I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble." Cushan and Midian are believed to refer to the same land, just to the south of Edom. Like Cushan is like a different name for Midian. It's kind of thought it could be Cush, which would probably be on the other side of the Red Sea from Midian, but it's not really described that way in relation to Midian, like in any other place, like it is here in Habakkuk chapter 3. Even in Bible dictionaries, it's thought that Cushan is another name for Midian, just prophetically here in this verse. And so Midian is this land on the northern edge of the Red Sea, just south of Edom, kind of in that wilderness of Paran type of area, but just south of Edom, outside the land of Israel. And it's got this trembling and it's got this affliction, of course. And that again is the direction from which the Messiah has come to approach Jerusalem. Then we get into verses 8, 9, 10, and 11, and we see these kind of like plagues in nature, these natural disasters. There's some sort of the use of nature and the affliction of nature in God's wrath in that day of vengeance, in those bold judgments, that it's not exactly clear exactly how Habakkuk is seeing this, what he's describing. But he's describing God's use of the rivers, the seas, the way that rivers split the earth. And then some people have thought that it could be a reference to the flood of Noah and how springs of water shoot up, or it could be this torrential rain that causes flash flooding. Either way, we don't know exactly what it looks like, but it looks like the Lord is using natural disasters on that day to bring wrath upon those wicked armies. And it involves the rivers and the seas and even the mountains and the depths of the ocean and the sun and the moon. All of that is all kind of combined. And it is language that's reminiscent of previous things. Like you could look at Joshua 10, where the sun stood still in Joshua's battle at Gibeon so that they could defeat their enemies. They prayed that the sun would stand still. In Joshua 10, verse 13, I've got this in the notes. The sun stood still and the moon even stopped until the nation took vengeance on their enemies, until Joshua had secured his victory. And so it's very, very similar type of language here. His wrath is just this comprehensive cosmic disturbances, natural disasters, earthquakes, lots of things taking place. We don't get maybe the exactly how it's unfolding here from Habakkuk, but we definitely will when we get to later prophets who will give more clarity into kind of exactly what unfolds and what Habakkuk is kind of describing here in a sort of jumbled way. Later prophets will unravel it a little bit for us. But he sees the Lord riding on his horse with a chariot, with a bow, with arrows. And boy, when we get to Zechariah, are we going to see that in a real literal way? We're not there yet. We have to wait till we come to that. But later prophets are going to draw from this same type of language. And surely I've got it in there. As he sees the Lord riding victoriously, this is the same kind of language in Psalm 45. I would reference this later, but I'll throw it in now. Psalm 45, starting in verse 3, it says, "Gird your sword on your thigh, O mighty one, in your splendor and majesty, in your majesty, ride out victoriously. For the cause of truth and meekness and righteousness, let your right hand teach your awesome deeds." And again, that's the day of the Lord's vengeance. Your arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies. The peoples will fall under you. And that's really what's happening here. And so he goes on. The sun and the moon stood still as the light of your arrows speed by, flashing with a glittering spear, striking, the hearts of your enemies, that kind of language. We've got just this very victorious warrior. Similar to Psalm 45, but very, similar to what Zechariah is going to see later. So we'll make sure to come back to that when we get to Zechariah in a few weeks. But here's the cause. You marched through the earth in fury. You threshed the nations. Remember, Isaiah 63, very reminiscent language, but he says, you went out for the salvation of your people. It's the Lord's coming as the deliverer of his people to judge the wickedness of the nations and those who have exalted themselves against God's covenant, who have opposed Israel and God's covenant purposes. You went out for the salvation of your people and for the salvation of your anointed. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked, laying him bare from thigh to neck. I mean, just this complete submission, this complete dominance. You pierced with his own arrows the heads of his warriors. These are the warriors who came like a whirlwind to scatter me, to scatter Israel. They were rejoicing as if to devour the poor in secret. Again, as if they could come and destroy Israel and it be hidden from God's sight. And this is the ultimate expression of the hubris of the Babylon system and the rebellion, because they think they can exploit the poor and nobody will notice. and they accumulate this mass amount of wealth in that rebellion period before the tribulation. But of course, then the Antichrist seizes that, accumulation of wealth, and he uses it to oppress and to seek to destroy Israel. And so all of that culminates in them coming to destroy Israel, thinking that they can devour the poor in secret. And of course, it's not secret. The Messiah appears. It's all been seen, and he's coming to hold them to account. The day of accountability has arrived, as Isaiah talked about in Isaiah 65, or as Zephaniah talked about quite a bit, we looked at in previous weeks. All right, so here as we get to verses 16, 17, 18, 19, through the end of the chapter, this is now kind of the vision is over, and Habakkuk is describing kind of his takeaway, his response. He's seen this. He's been reoriented to the biblical narrative. He's seen the day of the Lord's vengeance, Israel's final deliverance. It feels sure in his heart, but he also knows that it's not today. And that's a pain point for Habakkuk, because the fact that it's not today means that Babylon's still going to come. Israel is still going to be conquered, and they're going to be taken into exile. That deliverance will come, but there is rebellion and discipline and tribulation that comes first. And so even with the hope of all of that, there's got to be a resolve in the heart of the prophetic intercessor to endure and to be a faithful witness of that day before it happens, to set our hopes in it, though yet we're still waiting for it, and to be a source of stability and hope to others as they are struggling for hope and having to endure that season of discipline and that season of tribulation. And many other prophets went through the same process. Isaiah had said, this is, my body trembles. Isaiah said, I writhe like a woman in labor. Pains have seized me. I mean, it is what he says here in Habakkuk says, rottenness has entered my bones. And really not so much because of the wrath of the Lord on the day of his vengeance, but because he's got to wait. Because that day's not today. Because their deliverance is still for an appointed time yet in the future. And he, like the prophets who have gone before him and the prophets that will come after him, have got to patiently endure the tribulation and be a faithful witness. And understanding the biblical narrative, being oriented to the biblical narrative, is what empowers us. What empowered Isaiah and Micah and Habakkuk and many others like Daniel and Ezekiel and those who endured that exile to do that, to be a faithful witness. And so here's what Habakkuk says, I hear and my body trembles, rottenness enters my bones, my legs tremble, yet I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon those who invade us. Because he has set his hope where it rightly belongs. And he knows the Lord is using a wicked instrument to refine his people, but he trusts that it is, in fact, the least severe means for the most redemptive outcome. It may not be Habakkuk's preference, but it is going to be the most redemptive outcome. And to come to that surrender and that realization is a powerful thing for the peace of our own hearts. And this is what Isaiah and Micah had also modeled maybe 100 years or so earlier. Here Isaiah had said in chapter 24, verse 16, I waste away, woe is me, as he's realizing the tribulation that's going to be endured. But in chapter 26, he changes his tune. In chapter 26, he says, in the path of your judgments, O Lord, we wait for you, because your name and your remembrance are the desire of our soul. In the path of your judgments, even though we've got this discipline of the tribulation to come upon us, we wait for you. And again, it's very purposeful because, and Isaiah goes on to describe, we covered this as we covered the weeks of Isaiah, how the Lord uses that faithful witness to turn many, to bring about a harvest of the repentant in the midst of that tribulation. It's very, very purposeful and hopeful, even though there's difficulty in it, but there's hope and redemption actually even in the midst of that. And it goes on, Micah says very much the same thing. He says, "But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation, and my God will hear me. Rejoice not over me, my enemy. When I fall, I will rise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be light to me. So I will bear the indignation of the Lord because the sin of my land and the sin of my own life that I've sinned against him until he pleads my cause, and he will execute judgment for me. And he will bring me out to the light, and I will look upon his vindication." He says, this is the Lord has got this in control. And as long as we have got the biblical narrative in our mouths, in our prayer life, in our dialogue with the Lord, we enter into this same advocacy, this same prophetic witness that Isaiah and Micah and Habakkuk embodied. We too will embody it. And that is one of the most powerful things on the planet. It's amazing. And so Habakkuk concludes much in the same way. Even though the fig tree won't blossom, and the fruit is going to remain on the vines, and the produce of the olive will fail, and the fields will yield no food, nor any fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive will fail, and the fields will yield no food, the flock will be cut off from the fold, and there will be no herds in the stalls, even though we've got this Babylonian invasion and this exile, even though the tribulation is going to come upon the saints and upon Israel, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. Very, very similar to Micah chapter 7. I will rejoice in the Lord, and I will take my joy from the God of my salvation. Even if it's not today, even if the fulfillment of these promises is not today, I still am part of the biblical narrative. And as it's unfolding, I can find joy in how God is using me to be a witness in that place. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He's not going to walk by the light of his own fire. He's not going to seek to secure his own destiny, his own self-determination. Nope. God is going to be my strength, and he's going to allow God to be his strength. And that's a big decision to make. We've all got to make that choice to allow God to be our strength and to not rely on our own understanding or be our own strength to secure our own destiny or to, make the promises happen in our own timing and in our own manner. No. If we will lay that down, we are making a conscious decision for the Lord to be our strength, and he will make my feet like the deer's, meaning steadfast and firm. The footing of a deer is very steadfast, not easily shaken or toppled. And he will make me tread even on the high places, even among the cliffs. I will tread and will have stability in times of uncertainty, in times of turmoil. That's huge. And that's not just a exterior stability of your income and your influence and all of those things. No, it's first and foremost, he'll make your heart like the feet of a deer. He'll give peace to your soul and give you stability in your mind and in your emotions. And from that place, you can then become one who imparts stability to those around you as a faithful witness. That's what Habakkuk so lacked in chapter 1. He's so dysregulated. And so he comes to God with his complaint. And as he refamiliarizes himself, he orients himself around the biblical narrative. And as that narrative, the words of God, become Habakkuk's words, then he's regulated, he's stabilized, and he takes his place as a faithful witness alongside Isaiah and Micah, and ultimately alongside us in this generation who will do the same thing. That is huge. I mean, Habakkuk is huge, and I do think it's worth us taking the moment to let it sink in. So I hope that you'll do that this week. Learn from the example of Habakkuk, and if you want to dive deeper into it, then what we're able to do just in these videos, do check out the book by my friend Samuel Whitfield called Have You Been Blinded? I will put a link to it in the notes for this video and for the notes on our website in the Servant Leader Network app, so you can see it I encourage you to get it. It's very simple. Like, it's not a complicated book. It's an easy read, but it's powerful. Powerful. Highly recommend it, and I'm so thankful for all of you who watch this video. I'll see you next week.